This week we talk about The Right Stuff. It's basically the story of the first astronauts into space, based on the book by Tom Wolfe. I'm Judge Chang with Dan Edmonds.
Hello there.
And I think one of the things that find kind of relevant to this week's discussion is, recently there's some controversy about The Crown and how, sometimes, we kind of, the depiction of things, the fictionalized version and stuff like that is really kind of, becomes controversial for people and, questionable. So where do we draw the line between like fact and fiction?
Well, I think if you follow what Alan Moore's take on the world is, and some other of the Hermetic people, they sort of say we're gradually moving into a reality that is, half fictional anyway, or we're blurring the lines continually anyway. I mean, you obviously do things to make them more compelling in whatever format, be they TV or movies, and I guess the danger is, even if it is a danger, is it wrong that we remember royal life as the crown, or we think of like medieval life as Game of Thrones? It's probably very, very far from the truth, but does it actually, does it have much real relevance to everyday life as the accuracy of it all? I don't know. I mean, it's
I love the quote from V for Vendetta that artists use lies to tell the truth. And I feel like that's different times, how it really is, even, like when you get down to it, even the most, kind of accurate kind of, portrayal, the kind of sometimes the true crime stories, right, that they kind of do these depictions of and stuff like that. I feel like part of the point is that like it's conveying, something that we just, even like in our bones kind of know is true. Sometimes, even with this most, accurate kind of reenactment or, portrayal, stuff like that, it's really the smoke and mirrors kind of depicting the truth in a way. And that, in other words, we're kind of always making an image of what is and stuff. And, because the fact that like, we're not able to actually be there, right? And we're trying to kind of just convey, how it felt or what was going on for the people, stuff like that. And then there's also the Rashomon effect, which is also like, any given situation, right? There's going to be multiple stories and then, multiple realities based on those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the question of, I guess the only thing that springs to mind is, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to make the same mistakes again. So I guess it's the problem is by reinventing history, do we sort of invalidate our own ability to deal with the same situations should they arrive? But, but you're right. I mean, there's obviously sort of multiple different threads that all sorts of people can create about all sorts of things. And I mean, my dad's a historian, and he often will like pick apart shows that are set in any historical period and just say, oh, well, that's totally ludicrous what they're doing there. They wouldn't have done that. But that's his. I don't know that his version of the TV show would be particularly exciting though. So it's
right.
What you do.
So in the original movie, The Right Stuff, this was made in 1983, which is kind of, almost like in the middle of, the 80s Reagan era. This is a time when, like the United States was really kind of, deep into the Cold War. And, in some ways, we looking back now, we realize that it was actually coming towards the tail end of the Cold War. And what's interesting, of course, is that like, a key part of The Right Stuff is the fact that like, the space race was really a offshoot of our competition with the, Russia and Soviet Union at the time to, get the first man into space and then ultimately to get to the moon and everything. And, we'll definitely kind of, touch upon this many times. And one of the core questions of all of this is, like, what is the right stuff and everything? And so, there's the different aspects of courage, there's different aspects of luck, and so on and so forth. And like I said, we'll dive more into it. And actually, one of the interesting kind of things that comes out of this is the question of what does it mean to be a man? Because that's like also another thing that like, the 80s was kind of the we saw the rise of the, quote unquote sensitive man and stuff like that. And because this is like the time, post-sexual revolution. So people, guys are really starting to kind of really trying to find a way to redefine themselves and stuff. Because part of the, with the equality of women and stuff is the fact that like, they were also, starting to kind of compete more with men in a more level playing field and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a big comment on masculinity in both the movie and the TV show. I think The Right Stuff has a slightly more deeper meaning, perhaps, with the TV version, because I think it's more of a moral question, in that you see much more of the ethical kind of choices and that each of the astronauts has in their own lives, in their personal lives, and what they actually do in terms of trying to get ahead.
Right.
So yeah, it has a slightly deeper connotation, I would say, in that respect. But I mean, I think in terms of the in the movie in the 80s, it feels more like this is a comment on duty, I would say, and sort of honor, because. Yeah. If you'll notice, each of the astronauts is always played against Chuck Yeager, who is portrayed in this movie as someone who doesn't seek glory or fame, who's purely there trying to become, the very sort of fastest person, or push the limits, push the envelope, as they keep saying in the movie. And he's not really concerned with going to space or being, and going down in history in that respect. So, and I think it's kind of the underpinning message of it is sort of like, well, you can be the best. You don't need to have all that glory, and it doesn't. That's not what defines you as a heroic champion or something. Yeah. That's kind of what I got from it.
Yeah, it's, Sam Shepard, of course, plays Chuck Yeager in the original movie and stuff like that. And Yeager, recently passed away and stuff like that. But the real Chuck Yeager actually had a cameo as Fred the bartender in the movie and stuff like that. So that was interesting. And I think one of the things that I find that is funny to some of the different things we talked about before is that we really see like this kind of Western theme, like, these guys are like kind of in some ways portrayed as kind of these cowboys, the defending of the farm in some ways is kind of this defense against, communism, kind of, again, going back to the kind of, the what's called this kind of connection between the Cold War and the space program stuff. And I love the one expression that Yeager used to use was kind of the spamming the cam. It was kind of his, basically a little bit of the sour grapes kind of thing. But also, I think, the reality is that he like you said, he just never, that's not a goal of his, because he didn't really see much skill in like kind of sitting, in a, in all intents and purposes, a craft that was piloted by, all these scientists and stuff like that. And
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good point. It did feel a bit like Magnificent Seven or something like that. And what was interesting about the movie was that it didn't focus on any of the particularly interesting characters. It really just kind of, it tried to cover each one of them individually and set them all out in different sort of characterizations.
Right.
And and it followed. And I mean, I was quite surprised at the running time. I was like, blimey, it's 3 hours. But but it covered each one of them. It didn't really, it finished with Gordo going up into space. Once again, as always, spoiler alerts for all of this stuff, because we'll be delving into it details. And I felt like, that was, they had to felt like they gave every single astronaut a shot of their adventure into space, but very little in terms of their personal lives or anything really negative, particularly about them. There was a little bit of drama to do with, the relationships within the group, but most of the drama was kind of this group of astronauts versus the Russians and the entire fight for progress. Yeah. And the things that happened on the way. There was very little in ways of, the actual character drama, I would say.
Yeah, we only see a hint of like kind of the drama between Gordo, Cooper, played by Dennis Quaid, and his wife Trudy, and there's really no discussion about the idea of sending women into space, which like kind of it's more of a thing in the series and stuff like that, and where they kind of carry out more of the drama. And then coincidentally, I did start watching For All Mankind, which is actually a fictionalized, kind of almost a Watchmen reality version of the whole space race. Because what happens is in that one, Nixon actually does become the president instead of Kennedy, and he becomes responsible for the space program and stuff. So yeah, so there is no kind of Lyndon B. Johnson kind of thing and stuff like that. It's really like, and the other thing is like kind of some minor spoiler that like they get into a race with the Russians to send women into space, and the Russians end up being not only the first to get to the moon, but also sending a woman and stuff like that. So and yeah.
Oh, that sounds interesting. There's also, of course, the what was it? The Astronaut Wives, which is all about the wives. There's another series, sort of spin-off TV series about it. I didn't watch that either, but it was interesting. I mean, and I think the reason I think that you have this kind of Magnificent Seven feeling is because looking back, these were a lot of the actors of this movie went on to become very famous. You've got a real star-studded cast here. You've got, and the weird thing is that if you've noticed, it's almost like they've swapped their surnames of the characters they're playing. So you've got Scott Glenn playing Alan Shepard, Sam Shepard playing Chuck Yeager, but you've got Ed Harris playing John Glenn. Right. And then I think there was another one I noticed. It was like, what the hell's going on? They're like, swapping. But that was kind of confusing. But yeah, I mean, you've got Ed Harris in one of his earliest movie roles, really proper movie roles.
Is, yeah.
He looks, there's barely a wrinkle on his face in this, which is very unfamiliar.
Yeah, this is way, of course, before Westworld, which right? Where he seems a lot more aged, like you said. So, yeah. Yeah,
and I mean, Scott Glenn, as you may, if you watch the latest Daredevil TV show, he's Stick in that, and has done lots of other stuff as well.
Lance Henriksen as Wally Shirra,
Yeah, very minor part for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, Harry Shearer's in there. And of course, Jeff Goldblum is one of the researchers in NASA.
he's each time, anytime you need the guy running into a room, it's Jeff Goldblum.
That's right. And Fred Ward, who's obviously in loads of stuff, as Gus Grissom. So yeah, there's plenty of people. I'm trying to remember John Ryan, who's not one of the better known people. But we saw him more recently in Future World as the scientist. And of course we have, because this was directed by, I can't remember his name, but the same guy that did Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which explains why you've got so many of the same cast from Invasion of the Body Snatchers in this.
Phil Kaufman,
Yeah, Phil Kaufman, and that's why we've also got, of course, Veronica Cartwright.
Yes,
when I saw her, I thought, right, we're going to have an intense scene coming up between that wife and
sure enough.
husband. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, I'm trying to remember the name of the actress who played Chuck Yeager's wife. She seems like she's been in a lot of stuff, but I've not really seen her.
What's called? I'm drawing a blank for her name also and everything, but Barbara Hershey, and Hershey, I think she's probably best known for Hannah and the Sisters and stuff, but she's definitely been in multiple other things. So yeah.
So yeah, a lot of famous people in this, and probably really quite early on, actually, still in a lot of their careers. So yeah.
And I tell you, like it's just it's also like just kind of this epic movie, right? Like kind of, in other words, it had the 3 hours of runtime, but also it just has more the feel of like kind of we kind of talk about movies like Ben-Hur and like kind of that, like, in fact I'd say probably other than like the superhero movies and stuff, there's not many movies that you have that kind of that kind of feel of like this huge scope and like where you have also these scenes where like you're seeing like the launch sites and or different times like you're in what's called in the sky flying around with these guys and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it really tries to encapsulate this idea of, okay, we've learned how to build flying machines. What's next? And really trying to sort of chart the progress of, those early days with Chuck Yeager trying to break the sound barrier all the way up to actually, going into orbit. And I have to say, actually, because I watched this the other way around. I watched the TV show, then I watched the movie.
Okay.
And I was actually quite gripped by the whole Chuck Yeager part of the story. That was really, really quite enthralling for me. And actually, when it got to the space mission, I got a bit bored with it, to be honest with you. But
interesting.
But I mean, the fact that he not only once but twice cracked his head on a cockpit window or blacked out and managed to save himself from spiraling to death was pretty astonishing. But yeah, it was interesting to see.
If you ever have a chance for his biography as well, like where, just even before all this, like kind of before he was a test pilot, he was a pilot in World War II, and like kind of it was towards the tail end, and he had some different adventures there as well. So this is a gentleman who like definitely has been around the block more than a few times and stuff.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Yeah, so I mean that was really interesting, and I thought it was nice to see some of the archive footage mixed in as well.
Right.
And I thought they did that. It was even given the 80s, they did it in a way that was quite subtle, I thought, and it was quite well done and interesting to just see all those rockets exploding one after the other. That montage was quite good.
That one engineer like kind of just was like it was hilarious, like different times where he'd be just there just to push the button and you never quite knew what was going to happen.
That's right. Yeah. So it was pretty good. I have to say I didn't think it was. I don't know what your general thoughts on the movie are. I didn't absolutely love it. I thought it was quite good in parts, but I see it got like ridiculous, 90% plus on Rotten Tomatoes and things like this. And I thought there were some good performances, but I don't know if this is just general people's love for spacecraft, or
right.
I'm just missing something in this movie. I don't know, but.
And I think that's the funny part too with movies in general, where sometimes it's really like between like the subject material and the way the movie is shot and stuff like that, it's kind of like a splitting the difference sometimes. I think where like we sometimes maybe give the movie more credit just simply because of the fact that we love the fact that these astronauts are doing these heroic things and stuff, and it's not necessarily like kind of that as a movie. It had amazing kind of, cinematography. This, I mean, everything about the movie, I think, as a cinema piece of, craft and stuff like that, is skillfully done. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, I wouldn't say like, there's anything revolutionary in any of the, like kind of, footage. I mean, that's something that I think is, I don't think anybody would try to claim that and everything. I thought one part though that was kind of like striking was this kind of almost like Grim Reaper. I thought that was like an interesting cinema. This gentleman by the name of Royal Dano, that like he's one of those character actors we know, like we see from like all different kinds of. In fact, he's the voice of Lincoln in the Disney display of the presidents and stuff like that. Apparently, so
right, okay.
So he's got one of those distinct kind of what's called presence.
Yeah, and of course he's been in lots of westerns as well.
Yeah,
so you
absolutely.
sort of,
and totally fits in with like what we talked about too. So
yeah, no, he was an ominous presence, I would say, in any of the
definitely.
But so but I mean, what did you? Because of course you have a more inside track on what these people went through than me. So I don't know if there was anything sort of interesting from a sort of military perspective.
Overall, I feel like somehow they had a lot of detail that like, maybe it was through consultants, whatever else, that was actually in some ways better than the series. A couple examples would be like, one was, John Glenn himself, that like, Ed Harris, like really like, he's got the look of a Marine and stuff like that. Like in the series, one of the pet peeves I had was that, like, I don't know who was the kind of advisor or else, but like just the way the guy's hair was, stuff like that. was not a Marine's haircut. I mean, because even though like, at that point, once they became astronauts, they were quote unquote civilians, that were kind of loaned out. But a Marine would not like really change the standards for his haircut. That's one of the things that would be clear. Because if you look at guys like Dale Dye or even Lee Ermey, right, stuff. Like if you even watch like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that movie that he was in, he still has his high and tight. Right, so that's what tells you a lot about when you see a guy and like he he was at some point a Marine, and he's kind of just one of those things that like just would not change, just simply because of the context or whatever. The other thing was the housing, where I think it was Trudy Cooper was kind of going through and like the
it's cockroaches and brown water and stuff like that. Yeah.
I mean, I tell you, like there was this kind of double standard, and we'll get more into double standards too, like throughout this discussion. That like if the military wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one and stuff. So on the one hand, you're supposed to like kind of have this family life and kind of go from base to base and stuff like that. But the other is like kind of like they were kind of always an afterthought, like kind of, oh yeah, we got to like house these people, stuff like that. We got to house their families, and so that was like a really accurate depiction. Of course, like the other part that's interesting is that not only has changed over the years, but it also like varies between the services, because like if you were in the Air Force, typically you would always have the more premium kind of combinations, stuff like that, and then like way on down and stuff like that. Like where by the time you get to be with the Marines and stuff like that, you're barely better than the kind of the bunks and kind of squad bases and that kind of deal.
Right. Yeah, and I thought it was always quite interesting in both this and the TV show to see this kind of bit of rivalry between the Air Force guys and the Marine pilots and things like this. So.
That is definitely a real thing. So that's something I can tell you.
Sure.
And it's one of those things that's kind of funny in the sense that like sure there's the part that we're on the same side and stuff like that, but also it shows this kind of thing that we've talked about in other shows that like there's this us versus them, that somehow there's something about human nature that we always seem to somehow make a us versus them. Even though you're on the same side, and stuff, but yet somehow there always is that. And then the other part that we kind of see and it's kind of carried over into the series is even within the astronauts and stuff, John Glenn becomes this kind of us versus them, in that like he's this kind of minority, I guess, that like different times he's kind of holding himself to a higher standard, and then like the others tend to kind of frown upon him. That like, oh, what are you, too good for us and stuff like that? And it's something that like from what I understand is definitely very accurate and stuff like that. And but it's an interesting aspect of the competition between the guys.
Yeah they didn't overly play that up there in this one. They just had him as a bit more of a kind of a bit more principled perhaps, and a bit of reconciliation between him and Shepard. But it was certainly not like the TV show in that respect. No. The other point that I noticed in this that was kind of interesting for me was the whole bit when John Glenn goes up and there's all the particles floating around the shuttle, and you get this impression that it's portrayed as this could be some sort of alien life form or something in that movie, and it just takes you back to Invasion of the Body Snatchers again. I mean, subsequently they found out these were sort of like frosted, water droplets that have turned into ice that were then turning into kind of this kind of flurry of snow that was coming off the side of the capsule. But it does make, I didn't know if they knew that in 1983 when they made The Right Stuff. Maybe not, I don't know. But it's definitely portrayed like it's a mysterious sort of space phenomena in this. So.
Yeah, and at the same time, I don't know if it's a spoiler per se, but there was like kind of the fact that like they were unsure about like kind of how safe it was for him to descend with like the heat shield and stuff like that. And so it got me thinking that like it was like kind of signs that like, oh, he's in trouble and everything the first time I saw this. And And also, like, there's kind of this weird mystical connection because you're on the on the ground. You know, Gordo Cooper is with these Aborigines in Australia and stuff like that, because that was like one of the stations, and like they're kind of doing this ritual, and so like it was kind of like almost like in a very kind of symbolic way, depicting that maybe somehow the ritual kind of protected them or something like that.
Yeah, I know it's like John Glenn up there with these weird sort of mystical particles floating around the capsule, and Aborigines playing didgeridoos and looking up at the stars and things like this. And it does seem like it's like they're sort of implying that the force of the universe saved John Glenn from burning up on impact, but subsequently he was just lucky, and the ice crystals were melting. But it's quite an interest. It's not unwelcome after a good 2.5 hours of watching this movie, to be honest. It was nice to have a nice surreal moment towards the end of the movie, but yeah, it was quite a strange moment.
And the other strange moment was like after that, when they like kind of had this barbecue with like the Texas, and I guess in some ways what they were depicting was how Lyndon Johnson's involvement, and we kind of see that in different ways and stuff like that. That basically he brought like kind of NASA to Houston, and then like kind of there's this Houston I guess center like where basically that there's like different things of the space program there, and I guess like kind of in effect like because that's his home state, that then he basically brought kind of NASA's business there, and like I think that's kind of mostly what they were depicting.
Yeah, I was completely unaware of that was the reason why NASA moved to Houston, but it makes it makes a lot of sense, and that he really wanted to capitalize on his own kind of credibility and marketing from the space program. And there's that really funny scene where he's trying to capitalize on the wife, having the photo op with the wife and not being able to do it, and I thought that was great.
He was just basically flipping out. and actually I forgot for a second there that we actually saw him in The Thing as well. Like kind of he was one of the scientists there.
Of course, that's right. Is he called something? Is he Stephen Moffat? Something Moffat is his name.
Donald Moffat, yeah.
Donald Moffat, that's right. Yeah,
he was one of the last guys that like they were trying to figure out like is he one of the, or is he the thing and stuff like that. So
that's right. Yeah. So isn't he, I guess, is a good maybe segue into the TV show?
Yeah.
Because
one last thing I did want to kind of mention no problem. Is you kind of talked a little bit about the principle and how that was like a key part about this, and that was part of Reagan's kind of pitch about like we're like fighting this war against communism. They're the quote unquote evil empire and everything. So there was this kind of idealism, but at the same time, the 80s was also, as we've kind of mentioned different times, was this kind of age of excess. And like I'll tell you that like I knew more than a few guys who they basically went from kind of Wall Street to flight school, like kind of so in other words, it was this kind of thing where like that the maybe a little bit like they're a little bit jaded, like kind of by kind of how that was and stuff. And so I think that's another thing that this film captures is how like in the middle of the 80s and stuff like that, there was this kind of hunger, there's a little bit of a desire for some kind of ideal and everything. And I think that's something that Reagan really did tap into as well. Yeah, no,
I think you're right. There was definitely a higher purpose needed all throughout the 80s, or that was there. But I mean, it was, as you say, absolutely juxtaposed by just lots of excess everywhere. And in all sorts of things. So it is interesting that in such a kind of consumerist sort of decade, you have this movie that's very sort of high and mighty with its ordeals. I guess maybe we just channeled it through the movies. Maybe that was the way to do it.
Right. So I think with the series, we definitely have lots of drama, and I think what it really, fleshes out more is this kind of struggle that we have with the, and these, here are these kind of, heroes that basically they're held to a higher standard and everything like that. But we also see like they're very human. They're very much, from the get go, like kind of, Alan Shepard, played by Jake Dorman, who we actually saw previously in Watchmen as Captain Metropolis and stuff, is
Right.
As Alan Shepard in this case. That they really bring out the fact that like he's this playboy. We don't really see as much of that in the original movie, but here, like they really like kind of emphasize like that, and I think part of what that also like kind of shows is that the double standard is that like where these guys, they're military officers, and so they're supposed to be the kind of these, family men and stuff like that. But meanwhile, they're often away and kind of, traveling to different, like whether it's wartime, they're like, all overseas and stuff like that, or at home, they're just kind of moved around different times. And there's this thing called the TACAN rule. So TACAN, if for those who aren't familiar, is a navigational aid. So the idea is that like once you got past 2 navigational aids out of your home base, anything goes. I mean, that's like kind of just
right.
So this is something that like I even got told as a junior officer, stuff like that. That like like oh like kind of once we're out away from home, that what happens,
in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the major difference is that you have basically all the astronauts sleeping with as many people as possible. The other thing that, I mean, what is the right stuff is one thing that we've been asking. Clearly for the astronauts in the TV show, Jack Daniels is the right stuff, because every 15 minutes, everybody is drinking whiskey. It seems like everybody in charge of the space program must have been perpetually drunk if they drank whiskey at the rate that this TV show has people drinking it. I mean, it's amazing the rockets even left the ground. If this is an accurate depiction.
Yeah, this is something that's interesting. Is by the time that I was in the the military, stuff like that, there was this idea of 12 hours bottle to breathe. That was what you were kind of told was like kind of the policy, and you were really held to that and stuff like that. Part of it is like kind of the things that we learned that like like, hey, by the way, you're more susceptible to hypoxia and like various kind of problems besides like just basically a hangover or something like that. But in this time, like kind of in the 60s, Tom Wolfe actually talks about that as a novel, that like different times these astronauts, if they can like get into their aircraft like without killing themselves and stuff like that, they were considered quote unquote what's it called, sober enough, and it's absolutely was like kind of just very different time. I mean, just the simplest way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's I suppose being a test pilot must be pretty stressful, and I'm guessing you probably need to drink your way through quite a lot of that. But it was just quite funny that.
And it's one of the things that like really held John Glenn apart. He was like he wasn't a Mormon or anything like that, but he was pretty religious, and he like kind of just would not kind of play in their reindeer games and stuff. Here he's played by Patrick Adams, and so it's just something that I think created more tension between him and the others. That it was just something that like and that's the funny thing about the military too. Like we tend to think of it as like this idea that different times is about conformity, it's about just simply blindly following the rules and stuff. But I think it's like kind of conforming is also a lot of it, and where different times there's this expectation that that in order for this guy kind of who's next to you to have your back and stuff like that, they've got to kind of more or less, you got to feel comfortable with them. So like if they're different, whatever, it's not quite as comfortable as like kind of like we're buddies in the sense of like, oh, everybody's kind of, we're all hanging out together, all kind of drinking together and stuff, and it's kind of even beyond the work hard, play hard thing and stuff.
Absolutely, and you hear Shepard accusing John Glenn of like, oh, you'd love it if I just blew up in that space rocket so you could be number one instead. And I mean, you certainly don't get that in the movie, but I mean, there's a lot more confrontation between those two. But again, you're right. It's this idea of like the band of brothers, and he's the outsider, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and also he kind of like, on one hand, he did pull him out of like kind of the hot water where like, he was caught with his pants down with like kind of the photographer, down in Mexico and all that kind of stuff. But the other, he called, the head PR guy and asked him like kind of, to pull some strings and stuff like that. So, that kind of really like, you can kind of see from Shepard's perspective that like, basically he had no qualms about talking to this guy, in the program that could almost get him thrown out and everything. And so, like where it's on the one hand, Glenn's attitude was like, hey, I saved you, you and the program and stuff like that. But the other, it's this thing of like, Shepard's kind of basically saying, like, yeah, but you didn't think twice about it because, you knew that there was a possibility of, screwing me over and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that was one of the most interesting parts of the TV show, I would say, that whole confrontation between those two and how he dealt with that situation. Because in some respects, you can see that the more important thing is that the space program doesn't get, its reputation tarnished. So I don't know. And that's an interesting kind of question, is like, who do you think is right in that situation for their actions? And I don't know, are there any of the astronauts that you particularly kind of identified with? Would you be a Gordo, or would you be a Shepard, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, because I'm not going to say that like I was like kind of, squeaky, clean, like on different times and stuff like that. But at the same time, I was really not into the whole drinking thing and stuff like that. I mean, I did, go out with the guys and that kind of thing. But I mean, I tended to kind of drink less, and it just kind of, what's funny, again, like we talked about the conforming thing and stuff like that. And, you have to kind of understand from my perspective, for me, I kind of grew up as always kind of like an oddball, right? And because, like, as a Chinese American, different times, there were not many Asians, like kind of, like in the different communities I grew up in there, like that. So I was always kind of like the odd man out, different ways. And then to join the military, I was still also the odd man out, because the fact that like, most, guys in the military were the white kind of, and we didn't talk about that yet, but that's kind of like the other part of the conforming, right? It's kind of like, just the fact that like, here were all these kind of, I mean, if you kind of looked at them in that kind of shot where all of them were standing together and stuff, they almost have the same identical haircut, and then except for John Glenn wearing his bow tie and stuff like that, they all kind of just all looked alike, and so that's another part about it. Kind of it's just and so my experience was that like different times, I mean, I would stand out as a sore thumb in a picture with like the squadron or whatever, something like that. But that's just another kind of aspect of it. And granted, since then even there's been since my time and all that like now they have women in the different units and side by side, and that was just something that was just starting to happen. And and one of the things that like we it's not directly related but in the 90s there's this whole scandal, that this thing called tailhook and stuff, and I think that was like kind of and this was after the original movie was made, that like we kind of see this a little bit, like we talked about the role of men and stuff like that, but the role of women had kind of really, I think the series kind of touches on it a lot more than the original, that the astronauts just kind of joke about like women flying, like kind of like
right,
they would kind of like roll their eyes at kind of just the idea of it, and then never mind like women astronauts and stuff like that, and that's like another thing that was really explored more, of course, in For All Mankind. But in this series, they do kind of really hit upon it, because Trudy Cooper kind of says, "Why not? Why can't I also go off the program and stuff?"
Yeah, no, that was an interesting sort of angle about her trying to pursue that, and I think that's what's kind of, I think that's what's kind of quite interesting about Gordo Cooper's character, because you can see there's one part of him that wants to kind of like accept his wife as an equal partner and be the family man.
Right.
And yet there's another part of him that's completely self-absorbed and wants all the glory for himself and just wants to go and sleep with the next woman who handles along. So he's really kind of, he's a very kind of conflicted character in that respect. Yeah. And you feel like he has almost no self-control in most of those situations. Whereas, and it's funny, in his own sort of way, Shepard is kind of, he very clearly delineates that. He's just like, well, this 10% of my life is my family, and I'm just going to do what the hell I want the rest of the time, and that's who I am.
And that's actually another aspect of, the flying that these guys really, kind of take from stuff, is that you're kind of really trained to compartmentalize, because like when you're up in the aircraft and an emergency happens and stuff like that, you've got to quickly, kind of be able to almost put your emotions in a box, and meanwhile kind of, very quickly kind of go through things almost without any emotion, like that it's, so in other words, they're kind of trained and conditioned to, box away different aspects of their life and stuff.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, because I mean, it's there's there's bits that allude to that, where the psychological sort of tests of the various astronauts, and they're saying, are you at one with yourself? And Shepard's just like, yeah, no, I'm totally fine. There's nothing wrong with me. And the way they sort of approach those. And so, I mean, in a way, John Glenn comes across as a much more authentic kind of human being in a way. And even though, and I think the point of the TV show, perhaps more so than the movie, is that, he's got the right stuff because he's actually living a more authentic life than the others. So in a way, it's kind of, even though Shepard gets to be the first, it's but I mean, again, that's the kind of the other sort of question that comes out of it, is like, do you need to be sort of brutally kind of alpha male and competitive and screw other people over to have the right stuff to be the first?
Right.
That's the other sort of interesting sort of question that comes out of it. And it seems like you've got to be either one or the other to be, or at least that's what this TV show seems to pose, is this idea of, it's basically about John Glenn and Shepard and and their lives essentially. So you've got the sort of very much the family man and the sort of alpha male, and how they kind of how they sort of work together. They definitely emphasize that aspect, because like different times, like Shepard would say, like, and it's all about being a better pilot, and that's all that matters in the end. And and we kind of see like kind of this hollowness that, like, he's first in space stuff, but he's kind of afterwards. It also, for me, echoes the one movie, Chariots of Fire, where like, Ben Abrams' character kind of, after he kind of, wins this race and stuff, he's kind of like, is there all there is and stuff. And, it kind of is like something we see. And here, meanwhile, they show like kind of Glenn at home and stuff, and he's, quite content with, being with Annie, his wife and stuff. And it kind of really, I guess, it's an interesting, kind of reflection about, competition, and like different times we strive for a goal, and, at any cost kind of thing. Well, what is ultimately the cost? Like, kind of, like what do you pay to get what you want and stuff? And then how does that kind of shape you as a person? Because in some ways, Glenn was kind of becoming something that, like, he probably wasn't really proud of, himself, like writing the letters to the congressman and stuff like that. And Annie actually tells him, like, like, this isn't you, like, kind of, and so I thought that was an interesting kind of aspect of, like, kind of where we're seeing him, this kind of ideal person and stuff being tainted by his ambition. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's really, you're right. The point when Shepard does actually finally make it into space, and he comes back down, and Glenn asks him, that must have been amazing. How was it? And you're just like, well, I really wanted it, and now, just want something else. It's like, I didn't really feel anything, Right. And this is really, really interesting in terms of how we even view ambition and desire in our lives, because often it's like we really desire something until we have it, and then it's on to the next thing, right? And it's almost like, I almost feel like it's the desire to keep desiring is really what propels us, so to speak. And I think in a way, regardless of the actual moral outcomes of it, Shepard lives this kind of life of constantly seeking the thing that he desires the most at any one given situation, and kind of trying to execute it as much as, as efficiently as he possibly can. And so, and I would say it just depends on which areas of your life he focuses on. But Glenn is much the same. He so badly wants to be number one. I mean, he's pretty much, he does it in a very political way, but he's not afraid of screwing over a lot of other people in the process of getting to that one. So again, it's like this unchecked desire to get to a particular goal.
And that's what really makes Shepard such a good, not so much a nemesis and stuff, but more of a foil, because he's like different times he says to Glenn, you are me, you are your hunger and stuff. Like he's basically like kind of throwing back in Glenn's face, because John Glenn really doesn't want to admit it to himself. Actually, he wants to kind of like be this kind of Galahad kind of character and stuff, but he's very much like kind of like I said, he's willing to kind of screw somebody over as well as as principled as he is. I think sorry, go on. Yeah.
Oh,
I was gonna say that's on the interesting aspect of this is like kind of this idea like our appearances, and then what we like kind of different times are kind of willing to do kind of or the things we do behind the scenes and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, because I mean I think it's the interesting thing with that is that Shepard is portrayed as a very private man, and John Glenn is constantly in the public eye. Yeah. So, and you see there is this divide between, well, there's sort of three compartments, you will say, to his character, and then there's the very public kind of promotional kind of part of his character, the family life guy who's very sort of stable, and then there's this sort of very private, super ambitious person who's scheming away in the background, trying to kind of figure out how he can get to be number one. Yeah. Whereas with Shepard, it's just sort of like, well, there's the very kind of simple but private family man, and then there's the sort of simple womanizing, heavy drinking guy who's both are very ambitious. So it's
And that's the thing, like where here's the first time that these guys are suddenly thrust into the limelight. They become celebrities, like overnight. Like we kind of talk more about the Life magazine deal and stuff like that. And part of that is that there's this kind of fine line between the press and propaganda. Like we on the one hand, like kind of that we want to have this story that gives America confidence in kind of their government and their country, something like that. On the other hand, it's like part of that is leading to support for dollars for the space program, because we forget that this was a time when it wasn't necessarily that NASA was going to be NASA. Like the space program was in its infancy, and like everything was questioned. Like it was not a given that we were going to spend more money on this in the future and stuff. It could have been very, very easily a failure that they just basically would rather just shove away and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's what's cleverly written about this, is that the people in charge of the program, how they balance this act of the egos of the astronauts, the public perception, and the technical issues that they're all facing I had the most admiration for them out of everyone in this TV show, because I just think, God, man, this is just like every day would have been a new, ridiculous challenge. You're trying to balance rocket science with infidelity and public scandal, and a president who definitely, who wants this thing delivered as soon as possible. It must have been incredible pressure. So they definitely deserved all the Jack Daniels that they drank in this show.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched upon it in the original stuff, where Johnson was trying to pressure his way into being from the camera with Annie and stuff like that, and something that they cover in both the series and the original was kind of her stuttering and stuff, which is kind of very real thing, and so it's interesting in the original that John Glenn, toes the line and says, like kind of, if you don't want to see him, then you don't, like kind of, so like that's where he drew a line, like kind of. So as ambitious as he was, and as much as he, loved being in the limelight and in front of the camera, stuff like that, he was very protective of his family, and that's something that kind of came across in both, the series and the original.
Yeah, I also thought the sort of side story about the what was it, the cousin or the daughter-in-law whose father dies, is that how it was? Yeah. That was very interesting, because I mean it was good in that it kind of made you at least feel somewhat empathetic towards Shepard as a character.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see his kind of, his take on life through his advice to her as well, which was quite interesting. Yeah,
and he kind of it kind of hints at that he was supportive of, kind of like, as much as he's like kind of this what's called skirt chasing character or something like that, but he had this kind of soft side that because he was like kind of hinted at him being supportive of the fact that, like, you can do whatever you want to do and stuff, so he wasn't like kind of all sexist or whatever you want to call it, stuff like that, much as he was a womanizer.
Yeah, and I think because they introduce his dad, and there's that sort of his dad's a real asshole at the dinner table. Yeah. So they kind of give him the get out of like, oh well, it's the parents' fault. That's why they screwed him up and turned him into a womanizer. Right. So yeah, they did a nice job. Well, I mean, TV shows often do that, where they'll portray a character in one way and then try and get you to like them in the next couple of episodes. So it makes life more interesting. Yeah.
And this was, of course, only, first season for the series. Apparently, they're at least on the block for season 2. So it'll be interesting, like kind of, because apparently, it seems like what their next thing that they're going to really get into is Glenn going into space, because that's where also the original movie ended and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what, where else? I mean, I suppose you can go to the landing on the moon. You'd have to obviously introduce lots of new characters and things like this, but that's not a bad thing. But yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty good watch. I actually really enjoyed, much more than I thought I would. The set designs and everything else like that are immaculate, really spot on.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like, period pieces like so tough because. I've kind of been involved with some stuff, some of these production, and you just have to have this meticulous eye for detail, beyond like kind of, just the actors and stuff like that. It's these sets, it just takes one Starbucks cup right out of place to kind of have a Game of Thrones kind of, controversy and stuff. And to kind of, throw you out of the, the kind of, the reality, I guess, or the dramatization of reality. So.
Yeah, one iPhone left on a desk somewhere. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's it was really, really meticulous in that respect, and you could tell they spent a lot of money doing this show. But I thought it was well written. I think it was written by a woman. I can't remember her name, but it was definitely, you could see the way that these husbands were portrayed and their attitudes towards women was very interesting all the way through it.
I thought that was another interesting aspect of it, because this is a co-production between National Geographic, which I can kind of see doing, this being historical things up, but Disney. And so, I tell you, like, pretty racy stuff for Disney, like overall.
Definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the way they it was kind of like Mad Men, Mad Spacemen, basically, would be how I'd kind of describe it. But yeah, no, it's good. I enjoyed it. I'll look forward to season 2 if they do it.
So I guess, this comes around to the question that we started with, beginning with this. So, what is the right stuff in the end, right? And, is it the physical courage, like kind of these guys kind of, put themselves, their lives and on the line, stuff like that? Is it the moral courage that John Glenn kind of, epitomizes? Or is it some kind of, combination and with a little luck thrown in stuff? Because, like something we didn't mention was like, what's it called? With Gus Grissom, like, in the original, they kind of show, actually both they do show, like, that this mishap with the hatch that you know, basically he gets blamed for it and stuff. And then, you know, sadly, you know, they in the post notes talk about how, you know, he was one of the astronauts that was you know, there was an accident that, you know, with electrical fire and stuff like that, that he lost his life and stuff.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, I think what is the right stuff in the TV show is kind of summed up by Shepard's inner ear issue. That was the key thing, because you notice that was something that did span over several episodes and even in the end. And I think it's this idea that regardless of whatever the world is throwing at you at any one time, your ambition, should you follow it absolutely and unrepentantly, then that will get you to that top spot. That was what I took away from it anyway. I don't know what your take on it was. The first movie, I don't think the right stuff is something very different there. It's kind of like more like a duty, and you just kind of keep slugging through. I guess similar kind of theme, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you say, you know, to the top and stuff, and something that they kind of mentioned a little bit about this kind of pyramid, that you're, you know, basically, slugging away to a degree, and you know, like, and to me, it is a combination, like, kind of, you know, the guts, the skill and stuff, like the willingness to kind of slog through it. But you know, luck does play a factor. I mean, you know, like, kind of, you know, it's just that, you know, that's what's interesting about it, is that, like, you know, I mean, just for example, like, you know, going back to John Glenn and the heat shield, you know, like, it was this kind of luck that there was this issue with it and stuff, but it was also luck that kind of, you know, in the end allowed him to kind of come back in, you know, one piece, you know, like, kind of that it didn't, like, you know, lead to something more serious. There's been, you know, multiple times, as we know, like, kind of more recent history of the space shuttle, they've had different kind of, you know, accidents and stuff. You know, granted, you know, like, kind of people can afterwards, like, you know, say, like, oh, they should have been careful with this, but there's definitely an element of danger, which is kind of, you know, we know this, and I think when we had these incidents and these, you know, accidents and stuff like that, that you know, the loss of life reminds us that, like, you know, there's, you know, there's nothing guaranteed. They are, you know, like, kind of risking their lives and stuff.
Oh, totally, yeah. And I think one of the more interesting sort of experiments that was done with, you know, top fighter pilots, Top Guns, I guess, is that they actually did a scan of emotional responses and brain waves, and they found that, you know, really top pilots have the ability basically to sort of preempt reactions of other people before they happen. And what they saw was that actually on a needle, they could see the emotional responses going up before the actual actions had taken place. Or before the events had taken place. So it's almost like we're almost into kind of quantum spiritual kind of territory, in that it seems like their emotional responses were happening before the, like, actual real events were taking place, which is really interesting. I don't know, precognition or whatever, but we're talking, you know, a matter of milliseconds here, but it was, you know, the needle was moving before the things were happening, which is a really, just shows you the sort of, like, I mean, it's incredible. And, you know, that's why when they talk about the top of the pyramid in the original movie, we're talking about really highly skilled, almost at the point of supernatural human beings who can sort of operate at these kind of high pressures and high speeds, you know. So
the expression in the flight program too was like that you have to be constantly ahead of the aircraft, you know, like, in other words, you know, if you're, like, kind of just responding to things and stuff, you're already behind, like, kind of, you know, like, you can't just go by kind of your reaction speed, so, like, you have to, like, really be anticipating it. So I think that's, like, really ingrained to these guys, and so it's and I mean, that's another part about it too, is that a lot of times, you know, these programs that, you know, train these guys and stuff is about washing out. They're, like, you know, they're, you know, seeing, you know, which guys have, quote unquote, the right stuff and which don't and stuff, and I mean, it's something that, like, I think when almost like in some ways, I'm reminded of the one expression that from Chief Justice Potter and stuff like that. That when he's asked about the definition of pornography and stuff, is that I know when I see it, and I feel like sometimes that's what it is with the right stuff too. That that sometimes different times somebody recognized in them that they have it and stuff beyond the tests that, and that's something that in both the series and the original movie they really do a good job of, was showing some of the ridiculous tests. And I can tell you that even with what I went through to get qualified for flight training and stuff, they still have a lot of different things. It's not as crazy as some of those things are, but it absolutely is really cutting above standard that you're held to and everything. For about a year or so, because I had a skin condition from when I was a kid and everything, I was disqualified and that I had to ultimately apply for waivers and until eventually it got approved and everything. That in other words, for about a year, I didn't know whether or not I would be accepted into the scholarship program because of just this one thing. So, and somehow another that eventually some doctor somewhere, God bless him, saw to that the skin condition, nah, he's good.
Yeah, it seems a bit ridiculous. Yeah. Yeah, because of course we have the scene in the TV show where Deke is told that he can't participate because of the slight sort of heart
murmur.
Murmur. Yeah, I mean it's a lot of boxes to tick when you try and become an astronaut, I guess. So.
And that was him having gone through all the program and the training and stuff, after all that, and then being told, that's even more heartbreaking, stuff. I mean, you're just it's basically you're just about to walk through the door and the person goes, actually, hold up a second.
Yeah. Terrible. And of course they had the time in the TV show to actually cover that. So it was interesting to see these kind of the failures as well as the triumphs.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the main thoughts I had about kind of these and everything. Any other last things that?
Not really. No, I mean, it was much. I really enjoyed the TV show much more than I expected. I guess I'm now looking forward to the next remake, if it even is a remake, or maybe it's a sequel. I guess along the same lines would be Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick. I guess when we finally get to see that in the cinema.
Right.
And I should say on a final note, me and John, sometimes we kind of joked a little bit a couple of weeks ago offline that, we could rename our show The Death of Cinema, because it seems like there's just remakes being churned out and no one's going to the actual movie theaters anymore.
Right.
And TV shows seem to be becoming more popular. But of course, as we've seen this week, shares of AMC have jumped up enormously due to the meme stock phenomena. So maybe there's hope yet for movies in general after this week. So.
Maybe. So that needs to be seen. So I think coming up, we've kind of talked about doing some David Cronenberg movies. One that I thought, kind of next week is, Groundhog Day. I think it will be fun to kind of do that with these unofficial remakes because, knock on wood, that one hasn't been officially remade, but, who knows, I guess at some point. But these unofficial ones, like Happy Death Day, more recently Palm Springs and The Edge of Tomorrow, Tom Cruise, we're definitely worthy unofficial remakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, with the virus and COVID, every day is starting to feel like Groundhog Day already.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So once again, I'm John Chang with Dan Edmonds. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the movies.